Thank you all for coming. First and foremost, I'd like to say that given our recent experience with secure design and construction here on island, it's still a good idea for us to try to build on the lessons learned from that. With that said, however, this meeting is strictly non-attributional, strictly educational, unclassified. So please make sure that you're not saying anything that shouldn't be held in this forum. The audience for this is mainly directed at our local industry business partners that will actually be executing the construction on these projects, to give them a brief overview of what it takes to try and do this with several folks that have been doing this for years and years. Also, if anybody is interested in receiving professional development hour credit for this, please just put your name in the chat box. I will copy that down and I'll be sending it out to you. Also, please feel free to contact me directly via email, which I will also put into the chat box. Okay, without further ado. All right, real brief introductions. Go ahead, start with Rob.
My name is Rob Balcom. I'm the facility AMP for 48 CES. I've had an involvement with these buildings over the last 5 years, so have a fair understanding of them.
Danny Carter's not able to meet us today, but he is the Associate Security Manager with Lockheed Martin at the Sim Center here on RAF Lakentheath. He was able to contribute from kind of the end user customer side. Stephen?
I'm Stephen Helder. I'm the Regional Special Security Office. Work here on base, but I'm the Regional SSO for all of you safety in the UK AOR. So I've got about 14 years of security specialist experience as a civilian, and then I've been here on site for about 2.5 years.
Afternoon. My name is Darren Pruitt. I work in the 48th Fighting Advanced Programs Office. I'm the Information Systems Security Lead. I've been doing this position for about 7 years with 20 plus years of experience with builds and operations.
And my name is Matthew Scrivner. It's wishful thinking to say I'm still part of the wonderful 48 CES. I've currently moved to the Air Force Installation and Mission Support Command office on RAF Milden Hall. I just arrived there, and I've been doing military construction the last 6 years. Okay. Today, we're going to just briefly hide on some major key points, including why exactly we need to be doing this, the stakeholders, a couple of definitions, key documents, threats, and so on. All right, so kind of the most recent iteration and the background behind why we have such strict ICD 705 requirements is that back in the 1980s, they decided to construct a new embassy in Moscow, of all places. Principal opponent at that time, what they found is that there was such a permeation of bugs and other insecurities with the facility. You can see behind this crest, even something as, uber American as that had a bug right behind it. So because of that, and with all of the more advanced measures of detection and surveillance nowadays, it's only become that much more paramount that we follow all of these strict instructions. I'm going to go over and hand over to Darren.
All right, so I'm going to cover a couple of our stakeholders that you'll typically deal with as far as the build and what you're trying to do with your facility. Starting off with the accrediting official. That is your final authority for the accreditation. So when we talk about the end user and what we want out of a build to operate, that is what our accreditation is. So it's the ability to process and store material and have those discussions at that facility when construction is completed. The next person on the list is the site security manager. They're going to deal with they're responsible for all aspects, daily aspects of the construction site, to include material, personnel, and processes for coming in and out of that site and controlling the integrity of that facility. And the next on your list is the CTTA, or the Certified Tempest Technical Authority. They specialize in emission security and tempest aspects of the build. So they're kind of into the the RF and beeps and squeaks of the facility and making sure that we're appropriately protected from that kind of threat. Your Special Security Officer, SSO, in the SCI community, and your Government Staff Security Officer, GSSO, in the SAP community is your government representative for whatever type of accreditation you're trying to achieve. And they are going to be the liaison between the AO and the SSM for day-to-day operations and mitigating concerns throughout the building. Your mission users are your end users for the facility. So they're essentially the folks that you're building this facility for to accommodate the type of work that you're trying to achieve. And then your last two blocks there, your architect, engineer really is the individual that is deals with the outfitting and engineering of the facility. They need to have a thorough understanding of all aspects of the build to include how it's going to operate, how we're going to treat it, and the areas that we're going to try to protect and segregate from the unclassified spaces. And then your construction contractor is your day-to-day technicians on the site that are doing the works and putting in those facilities and requirements to make that facility run electricity, water, HVAC, so on and so forth.
All right, so some of the definitions. So SCI is sensitive compartment information, which is basically intelligence sources, methods, or processes. So it's the Director of National Intelligence, so it's kind of covering the ICD 705 policy, and that's who is the branch of that policy. So unlike, just like any other program, whether it's SCI or collateral, these are the three normal types of classifications. Just the difference is the extent of damage to national security. We do have kind of a slew of different types of secure facilities. So there's collateral, which is non-SCI or non-special access program facilities, is what we kind of call collateral. And what we are talking about today is more catered to SCIFs and SAPF specifically. But even within that SCIF and SAPF realm, we do have like permanent construction. We have tactical environments where it's normally like a shorter term deployment scenario. And we also have areas that we primarily approve for discussion only. And then the requirements for construction vary based on the type of facility that it is. So a little bit of background on the policies that we're kind of going over. So way back history, National Security Act 1947 established the intelligence community. And then in 2010, the first IC directive basically came out, and that was kind of like the implementation guide to say, we're going to establish a standard process for construction of SCIFs. At that time, it was just SCIFs, and later on, the SAP community kind of accepted the same policy as a way to build secure facilities. And then there is the 705-1. So the next one on here. So this also is 2010. So this one is a good overview. It's a short document. It's like 10 pages. But this one sets the physical and technical security standards for secure facility. It outlines a lot of the roles and responsibilities that Darren already covered. And it also gives an overview of the requirements for like perimeter construction standards. Talks about our RF shielding if it's required. And it kind of talks about the purpose as well. So basically with a SCIF or SAPF construction, the primary things that we are building for is to protect that facility against forced, covert, or surreptitious entry. One other thing in there is it also talks about acoustic protection, because that's also a consideration. There is also a 705-2. It's not in these slides, but that just is about basically cover reciprocity. So between different intel communities, since we're all using the same standard, minus any waivers, they should assume they kind of take on that same accreditation, if you will. So the one that we were going to focus on today is the technical specifications. So this outlines kind of in good detail on how we build these types of facilities. A lot of it has specific examples. I think we will get into that a little later, but you'll see a kind of layouts of like recommended wall types for different environments, how we do HVAC and all kinds of different things. So this is the tech specs. That is the current version. It's just a couple years old. And then the one on the bottom that I would recommend is the UFC for skiff planning. I feel like this is a good group for this one. So I pulled this out of there. It is the design of physical security measures is a specialized technical area that does not fall in normal skill record and resume of commanders, architects, engineers, and project managers. So this document basically was created for that audience. So some of the tech specs is still management. There's a lot of management and responsibilities in there. The UFC is strictly like how to build these types of facilities.
So one of the key factors that we take into any type of ability is what kind of environment or what kind of threats are available in that area that we need to protect against. And some of those things could be the physical compromise of the facility, how accessible is it to a individual trying to compromise material or the site, to include visual collection or theft of documents, eavesdropping, audio recordings, and technical collection and compromise. These are really the threats that they're effective, the most critical items to protection. So we talked about the AO. That's what the AO is going to take on board. They're going to look at the environment that you're building it in. Are you in a high threat? Are you on a military installation? Are you in a shopping center where there's a lot of random people can kind of move around? And then what they're going to build into that is layers of security, or security in depth is what we refer to it as. And that is, how many areas can we protect prior to an adversary to get to that source of that document? That's one of the things that we always take into account. So fortunately, most of the builds we have here in Europe, especially here in the UK, aren't necessarily the same as a US build, but there's a lot of similarities with those builds because the threat level is not excessive where you'd see in some other areas. Okay, and then kind of leading into that, the OCONUS differences during construction. So some of the things that we take into account in a construction site is the vetting of personnel to go as far as companies as well. So they're going to look at the people that are going to come onto the site to do the works. What kind of works are they doing? The consideration of someone laying pavement out in the parking lot is considerably different than the person that's putting up gypsum drywall or doing the inner works of electric sockets or fiber or copper runs. Other things that they're also going to look at is, where's the basis of the company coming from? Is that a cleared, vetted company that's been vetted through that country or through that AO? Cleared employees will be added to a list to enter the sites. The commercial carriers are going to be involved, so we can't just hand over material to some standard person and allow them to come and go as they please. That process goes into anyone that's entering or exiting that site, to include the construction or the constant surveillance service. One of the key items is if we're going to put all this effort into personnel and material, we need to keep eyes on it. We need to maintain that integrity of that material. And then where you purchase materials come into account, and how you control that material after it's been vetted and controlled is key. A lot of that time, material has to get onto the site very early in the process, and then it has to stay under visual control and maintain that security integrity until it's ready to be fitted out to the facility.
All right, I'll pick up from a construction point of view. These buildings are, by definition, highly bespoke and highly regulated. And my first bullet point is a serious one. These are not design and build jobs, full stop. They should be designed either in a two-stage tender or a management contracting sense, but the architect holds the design with the client group such that the intricacies of the processes by which this building is defined and constructed, with the details that are approved from the UFCs that we've discussed, and then that the process of assurance that this building is going to be handed over, have to be designed into the building at the get-go. Each party has to pick up its own load within this. The contractor has huge responsibility in his own supply chains, but if he doesn't have to worry about that the information he's giving, it can be issued by the architect to the contractor in a package format that doesn't compromise the interfaces between the various security aspects of the job. Because it's been designed at the get-go, we know all the pieces will fit together, even though those pieces have been broken down in such a way as to maintain the security of the entire system. One of the things that I do find that even very recently we've had this discussion, the security red lines have to go through the job very, very early. Once we got the definition of the layout of the building, we put the security red lines, i.e. the door has to, this is the secure side, that is the not secure side. How does that whole system operate? We don't put lever furniture on the outside of a secure door that overrides the security system within the building. It's as simple as that. Define your security red lines and then design those functionally into the building. Leading on from that, once you've got a secure building, what you don't want is people barging in to maintain it inside areas that have to be blue lighted. So the whole thing about maintenance should be designed, again, that word, right at the very start, so that the elements that need to be maintained are kept clear of the areas of operational use. If you can't get to something, it won't be maintained. And I seriously have looked into various skip areas, and because of this has been forgotten, there's some of the worst maintained buildings we have. Secondary point, really, think of, we've tried to convert buildings into skips. They're highly complex things to start with, and if you're trying to convert one building into another type of building, think about it to start with. Invariably, you come to the conclusion very early on, it was probably easier to build a brand new building to start with. These buildings can be constructed either in a heavyweight solution, concrete, and you get advantages from that, or you can have a lightweight solution, which is steel framed and partitioned. And there are details, which I'm not going to go through every single one, but I'm sure Matt's going to send this handout out to the team that's viewing this. And you'll see there are details for both, details for reinforced concrete and details for dry lining. Dry lining has its advantage, it's quicker to produce. Concrete has its advantages because it is intrinsically, it's better for all your RF stuff, I think. There's two ways you can do it. Standard details, if it's designed early, all of these standard details can be vetted, approved with the client team, and then issued to the contractor. That's why in the start of this, I said two-stage tenders. You can be designing and vetting your contractor at the same time. And that way you're covering two pieces of ground in parallel. An interesting one that came out of some work here is, we've had on this base, I don't know how many people are aware of Novec 1230, but because skiffs tend to be unfenestrated, enclosed spaces, they're windowless by nature, and they tend to be reasonably compact. And we tend to use fire suppression with water, and it has its advantages, it has extreme disadvantages. If it ever goes off, it's massively damaging. Novec 1220 is something I've put here. It's just, I'm not selling this stuff, I haven't got shares in this stuff, but it's just another way of fire suppression inside enclosed spaces. It's bus lights, light years away from halon. It's safe to use, and it can suppress fire without actually damaging anything inside. And with flight sims, those things cost a fortune. HVAC, all of your primary kit, keep it outside the skip environment. You've got the sort of 104 square inches. It's not very much. Yeah, it's the size that you're allowed to penetrate a skiff before the skiff penetrates the area outside.
96.
Is it 96?
96 square inches.
96 square
Yeah.
inches. That's not very big. You can make the plant easier to maintain by putting it adjacent to, but it has to be away from the secure environments. But be prepared that those areas will themselves, if you ever have to go into them, it might invariably blue light the facility because of the size of the apertures you've used to put AC or ventilation or whatever else into the building. Physical construction. There's a whole raft of pages in here in this document that will give you an idea of processes and detailing, which is, I keep going back to this thing, I think they have all got to be ironed out almost before the contractor is even engaged with the process, so he knows what he's doing. Contractors have a nasty habit of pricing in risk on jobs. If you take the risk away and tell them what to do, they can't price it in. Physical construction, dry lining, standard detailing, but always remember you've got an uncontrolled area and a controlled area, and they have to be understood right the way down to the guy actually doing the work. Yeah, because the detailing is the key to making this stuff work. If you go to the one with the physical construction with a that
yep.
is primarily what a skiff looks like. Yeah, its nature is what you can see on that. It's got to be inspectable. You've got to be able to see everything. Yeah, you've got to be able to inspect everything. Nothing can hide behind anything else. It's not buried in walls. Yeah, the form fits the function fundamentally. Windows, as I said, they tend to be unfenestrated buildings. Yeah, they have no windows. They are secure. My specialist subject is not the Tempest side of this, but again, all of the requirements are within the USCs, can be found, but they can be found and understood and then detailed before the contractor even gets involved. And I'm pretty adamant about that. People can debate it, but I'm pretty adamant about it. This is an interesting one. You can go as Gucci as you like with security, yeah? And now we can get electro windows that darken, lighten. Of all the skiffs I've built, all the skiffs I've had detailed, not many of them have this in them. This looks more like Langley than most of the skiffs I've ever produced.
But it is an option.
It is an option. It absolutely is an option. Acoustics, very, very important. And again, knowing the secure lines and the levels of security, because the interesting thing about secure buildings, not all parts of that secure building are as secure as other parts. You know, it's a layered approach right the way through the building. So that's audible security, that's electro security, doors, dB ratings, crosstalk attenuation. All of this has to be, again, detailed at the get-go, at the start, so everything is procured in the right way. And I haven't even touched on fire strategy yet. Yeah, I won't bury myself too deeply in that one. But when you're talking about secure buildings, their fire strategy is something that gets detailed with all your apertures, all the doors. Yeah, they've got to be secure doors. They might have to be fire doors. They might have to have fire furniture on them, ironmongery on them, secure one side, operable from the other side. I started this with a comment that I think these things ought to be designed up front, signed off up front, and then a contractor, whether in a two-stage tender sense or management contracting, I don't mind which way people go with this, but it's got to be that the design is ratified, agreed, signed off, and then issued, yeah, either as a pricing document or whatever. These are bespoke buildings. They have to be accredited at the end, and the accreditation relies on all of this being done beforehand. Because if you get a piece of this wrong, and the accreditor walks in and can't accredit the building, we've all missed the point of this whole process. But other than that, Matt, I don't think I need to go. Dielectric brakes, get them right. Yeah, get them on the right side of the wall. Get them in the right materials. This is all design. Do not let a contractor get anywhere near sorting these details out for you, because he will get them wrong. Categorically, he will get them wrong. Push me off get me into tent. Get somebody else into tent.
Okay, tempest. What is it? So the word itself is kind of like the definition. It's a phenomenon. Most people think tempest is an acronym for something. It's just tempest. Tempest is the study, investigation, and control of emanations. So things that we can't physically see, feel, or touch. That's what tempest is. All of our electronic equipment puts off these emanations, and the study of tempest is basically ensuring that those emanations are not transiting outside the secure space on things that we didn't intend for. So this is normally like building infrastructure. So something that's not intentional, that we wouldn't expect to go beyond the secure space. So any like fire sprinkler systems, HVAC, any other type of comm lines or alarm lines that are copper can be carriers of emanations from our electronic equipment. So the common mitigation techniques, there's two primarily, which is either a physical mitigation or electrical separation. So kind of the physical step is RF shielding. So RF shielding is very specific, and there's a whole long policy on what it looks like to design and install RF shielding. The next page has a couple pictures of what it kind of looks like, but even down to the seams, everything has to be RF. Gaskets in the doors have to be RF. The seams and the taping, as soon as you start putting penetrations in the wall, it starts to bring into question the attenuation of the RF application. So it's very specific. And I will say, recently they put up a policy, our accrediting official, to say that RF shielding was going to be required on all new facilities. So for us, this is like, and they said any modifications. So obviously that's a big deal from a cost perspective, and being overseas is kind of unique, because the next question is, well, who do we have that's going to apply this RF? Like, what type of vendors do we have? Are they going to say we need to have cleared contractors come and do that? Lots of questions to go with that. About a week later, I think they got enough questions from the field that they rescinded it. But I think from, my boss's perspective, and I think where it's heading is that any new construction, we are going to recommend that RF shielding is going to be part of it. What we don't want to have happen is build a new facility, and then a year down the road, they say, yep, all your existing accredited spaces must now have RF shielding, because I can't imagine how difficult it is to apply RF shielding on an existing facility. I think part of that is, as our technology advances, so does the enemy, so does our adversaries. We're starting to use more things like wireless devices, so things emanate further than they used to, and also the adversary is capable of picking up these signals outside of our secure spaces. So that's what we're worried about with Tempest. Yes, we still have the rule of making sure we have man bars that people from crawling into HVAC ducts. But I would say today we are more worried about someone outside the fence line on a computer and an antenna collecting signals from our devices.
Mr. Helmer, at the risk of embarrassing myself, but RF, we're talking about radio frequency?
Radio frequency.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, so the,
all new facilities must have radio frequency shielding.
That's where we're headed.
Okay.
With the other part of this is kind of the electrical separation. These are most things that we're kind of familiar with, and these processes really haven't changed at all. So we're talking about bonding and grounding. We also talked about the dielectric brakes, and there was a picture of that with the acoustic slides for like the HVAC system, or there's waveguides that can be installed as well. So these are all types of tempest countermeasures. And like Robert was saying, it's important that we have all of that guidance laid out. So there are documents that we do pre any commencing of construction that the AO will come back and tell us what's required. So there's a tempest checklist that we do, and they will specify what type of tempest countermeasure will be required for that construction. So with tempest, kind of the concept that goes with it is red-black separation, especially when we talk about physical separation. For our definition, red stands for anything that is classified. It doesn't matter which classification or which type of program or special access or anything like that. It's just red data. And then black is anything that is unclassified or is in encrypted classified information. We talked about some of this fibers on there. So normally now new construction, and even like when we do kind of major modifications, we're trying to move the fiber as much as possible. Not only is it generally better signal, it's also good from a tempest perspective because it is unlike copper or Cat5 that we use everywhere. It is a non-conducting type of material. Otherwise, normally when we have copper, we have to have physical separation of equipment, physical separation of those copper lines that are running, whereas fiber, we don't have as much requirement or risk with that. So I talked about the guidance that we would get, just to give you kind of an overview of what that looks like when we submit it. So AO is looking at it from where is this facility going to be located? What type of information is it going to be processing? What type of existing countermeasures are there? And are there any type of tempest certified equipment? I've never been anywhere that uses tempest certified equipment. Normally no one ever buys it because it's it's expensive, and all electronic equipment has a shelf life. So normally it is cheaper to implement all these things in construction than to buy actual tempest certified equipment. The other part of this is the big one, is inspectable space determination. Basically what this is a three-dimensional radius around the facility. And this is the area where we can inspect if there is something suspicious or someone suspicious around our facility that we would have the jurisdiction to go investigate or remove that threat. So like Darren mentioned, if we're like building a skiff in a public building somewhere, and we got like an unemployment office on one side and an insurance company on the other, obviously our inspectable space is limited at our perimeter wall. Basically where our door is, that is the extent of our jurisdiction. We will have all kinds of uncleared customers visiting those offices around it, whereas the difference is when we're on base, normally we have jurisdiction up to like the base perimeter. Accreditation, this is the last slide, 3 questions. So just to kind of peel it back a little bit. So the first thing that we do, which is one of the most important documents we do pre-construction, is a construction security plan that tells the accrediting official exactly how we're going to operate, how we're going to vet companies if we need to, how we're going to control access, how we're going to vet construction workers, how we're going to control materials, where we're going to get them from, what does that transportation plan look like from the company's manufacturing site to a secure site, what is the inspection of those materials. So everything is within that document, and we are not authorized to start any work until that plan is approved. So normally what we'll do here, and I know we've had this with our sites here, is we'll have a site security manager, sometimes is the one developing that, and we will develop a contractor-centric version of the construction security plan that tells them everything they need to know so that they can have an understanding of what they're getting themselves into and, project the bid process accordingly. So things to account for, like what they need to provide for getting their personnel vetted, how long is it going to take for them to get to work every day by going through, an x-ray system, what types of things are going to be prohibited and things like that. When it gets to testing and certification stage, we will be submitting a slew of documents to the accrediting official to review. Sometimes the accrediting official does not come on site physically, especially if it's like a modification of an existing facility. So it's not like a huge build. Not a lot of changes. They might not physically set foot on the ground. So they are relying on the information and the accuracy of that information. So what we need from the contractors is very good as-built. So we do provide diagrams for a lot of things. So like we kept talking about HVAC. So we need an HVAC layout. We need to show where all our penetrations are, how we protected them. If there was man bars required, we need to outline all those types of things on that. We submit a Tempest checklist as well. We also have intrusion detection systems, obviously, is a requirement. So those are all kind of pieces that go along with that process. And eventually, the contractor should be handing over all those documents. One thing to keep in note, we tried to avoid referencing these facilities as a SCIF or a SAFF, just because, you know, the contractor that's doing the fire suppression system really has no need to know where X system is going to be placed and what type of system that thing does. They only need to know this is the specs, this is what we're asking you to do, you know, install this conduit from point A to point B. Another thing I would just point out that's probably overlooked quite a bit is labeling. As years go on, especially like comm wires and conduit, everything at the point of the entry should be labeled. So as people come and go, you know, anytime a accrediting official walks in, they should be able to see something above a false ceiling, ask what it is, and be able to identify what it is and where it's going and what its purpose is. A lot of times over years, we just like run new cables in, and then it's like we're trying to trace stuff out. Like we don't actually know what this is or where it goes. So the more kind of stringent planning in the planning process and the more accurate guidance we can provide, the better we'll be at accreditation timeframe. I think that's it.
And closing, anything else from the presenters that we'd like to bring up? I think the bottom line down there kind of just wraps everything up very succinctly. It's costly, detailed, and long duration. Okay. We'll go ahead. We did buy back ourselves a couple of minutes time, so I was going to provide the post leadership an opportunity to have any announcements, any pitches for future meetings or dates. Sorry to put you guys on the spot, but if not, we'll see about after kind of the time ends at 1600. You can be on the line to answer any RFIs. Colonel McKinley, are you on the line?
He's not able to make it today, Matt. This is Lieutenant Colonel Sadar covering down.
Well, I guess if you're not currently a member of SAME and you're interested, speak to Matt, myself, or whoever invited you to this meeting, and we'd be very keen to help you with that. Or if you are a member of SAME but aren't affiliated to the United Kingdom Post, please do so. It's really helpful for us, and it means you'll get these invites rather than getting them by word of ear. And if anyone from any organisation has any ideas or suggestions for future meetings, please let us know. You know, particularly if you're from the military or government side, but you have a topic you'd really like to hear industry on, present on, that's definitely something we could look to link you up with.
Right. Whether that be something that's educational like this, a discussion board, or kind of anything else that you're trying to enhance the engagement between the government and the local industry, you know, so we can get ahead of problems and work better together. Okay. Are there any more post officers out on the line that would like to make any announcements?
Hey, Matt, it's Jet here. I got a plug. So for the next event, we've got one being worked on.
Going twice.
Hey, can you hear me?
Our first question is from Darren Zetherin, the planner / project manager extraordinaire from RAF Lakentheath He asked, what do fire officers think about Novec 1230 in occupied facilities? Is it not a requirement to provide water suppression for occupied spaces?
I think I threw that one in there as a thought process because it is as safe a suppression gas as you can find. Yeah, it's supposed to be used in unfenestrated structures. We've had the whole lot installed within our engine test facilities. Yeah, and I say it's marketed because yes, it's a company, so that's not it's a branding thing. I think it's a thought process thing. Is there something better than water to suppress fire with? Yeah, we've literally just taken foam out of all our foam systems because of the sundown agreement. Yeah, and we are now looking at what's the next best way to suppress fires. So the answer to that question is, I think we're on the lower slopes of that discussion, and this is about technology meeting our requirements and looking towards technology to meet our requirements.
Darren, does that answer your question?
Ish.
I think Jet tried speaking, but we couldn't hear him, so I don't know if our speakers are on mute or.
Okay. Please, Jet, do you have any announcements?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? I think everyone can hear me, but I don't know if you guys are able to.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I don't know what was going on earlier, and I swear I was unmuted. Okay, that's an easy one. No, I just typed it out there. Basically, we've got another IGE event on the 27th of April, looking at 1,300 hours. I'll send the calendar invite out soon. But basically, what we want to cover, so working with some of the Jacobs engineers, kind of talk about the Part L, UK Part L changes, conservation of fuel and power volume. We're really looking at volume 2, which is stuff that we're building. But there's a little bit of things that are associated in volume 1 with dwellings, especially with some of the units out or some of the organizations out there potentially building new military family housing units. So look out for that one.
Okay, Jet, actually yours is the next question. Is there a small list of contractors that the DoD used for skiff construction? We'll start with that one.
I'm not sure there is.
Right.
There's not. There's I mean, there's certain companies that specialize in like more tactical type of like prefabricated construction. There's one organization that the Air Force has that's at Lackland.
That's the Alice.
All cleared construction, and they specialize in skiff construction. We try to use them once or twice. The problem is, since they are this only government entity, it often takes years for them to come out and do a project.
Okay.
But they're all cleared. They have cover all the specializations, so they have, you know, HVAC guys and comm guys. So from the ground up all the way to completion, they are cleared American folks that specialize in construction. But as far as contractors goes, there's no like actual list of like approved contractors that do skiff construction.
Right. I think that just leads into maybe see what was done recently, the different companies that have successfully completed here in the UK. But also I think it goes into a very good construction security plan. So how you get, I guess, you know, your normal contractor to be able to come up to compliance, and how you're going to make sure that you watch and make sure that they're doing everything right. So the second question was for clarification. We have DIO in the UK. Do we do a Form 29?
Yeah, let me clarify that some more, Matt, because the first question and second question are tied together. So I don't know what you guys have experienced at Lakenheath with some of the major growths out there. We potentially in the wing might have a use in the future, and I'm using that term loosely. So just trying to see how other organizations in the UK we're able to accomplish it. You mentioned earlier that you guys they're like skiff in a box basically, or containerized units. Is that one way you guys have met that requirement? I mean, because that's really more of an equipment, and then kind of just built the shell, the protective shell around it.
I think that was a question.
Yeah.
Tracking the question exactly.
I've stumped you guys, or you guys didn't hear me.
Elaborate on that a little bit. 'Cause I think I understand what he's asking, but, Ian Smith from PMO across the street. So I think I saw on one of the slides earlier, I think it was under secure facility stakeholders. It mentions the U.S. contractors have to, or it was at least implying that they're the U.S. contractors are the ones that have to, approved ones, that are the ones that have to install these, construct these things. We want to clarify that they don't have to be a U.S. contractor, they just have to be cleared. And two, if they do have to be cleared and executed, and the work has to be executed through the lens of ICD and so forth, and have an AO and an SSO, does that mean we are not executing the work through DIO? The DIO being defense infrastructure here, they're kind of our construction agent to get work done. So if we're doing it through a different, I will say, mechanism to meet the standards of ICD, then how do we ensure that we are following the UK MOD protocols of executing the work, right?
So someone could probably explain this better than I can, but DIO is involved in our construction projects. They still have a role, I think, that they're supposed to have in facility work. That is a good point. So ICD 705 does actually state that design and construction is supposed to be done with U.S. persons and U.S. companies.
Yeah, there we go.
The caveat to that is all about how we write our construction security plan. So that is the expectation, but we can use foreign nationals for design and construction. We just had to have additional countermeasures. So that's all laid out in our construction security plan. That's why we do additional personnel vetting for foreign nationals, and we've got the companies. Same thing with materials. Materials are supposed to be U.S. materials. Some things are supposed to be like securely shipped, which is why we have kind of like a stringent inspection process for materials as well. So that is kind of it's about how we cater that construction security plan to that specific project.
And to kind of add to that, the ICD 705, the tech spec is really written from the U.S. build perspective. So it does not necessarily give you what an overseas build is going to look like. So you have to make some amenities to that. And that's where your AO comes in and lets you know exactly what his tolerance or her tolerance is as far as deviating from that document. So a lot of times the AO is going to determine what kind of countries are going to be involved, percentage of material and where it's procured from. Like here in the UK, we cannot have US electricians come in and do the work because they're not certified by UK regulations. So there's processes overseas that we have to account for to allow those folks to do the work. The IO is still heavily involved in all the builds. They are still that conduit between the builds and the contractor and the U.S. government. When it comes to builds, like certain processes, like you're talking about intruder detection systems, access control systems, those are U.S. vetted companies that are contracted solely for a process, and they may have a little part to do with the DIO piece, but there are other agencies that monitor and dictate and contract that piece out to those companies to ensure that we have that U.S. presence throughout that entire process, from procurement to cleared U.S. Individuals and for the entire process of installation.
So I think Mr. Andrew Lobley had the same question. So Andrew, does that also satisfy your RFI?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just to add on to, so another thing that 705 will say specifically overseas is that the construction surveillance technician role is also required. So unlike, CONUS, we might have like just a site security manager that's periodically overseeing the construction. Whereas here it's just the way that we use different techniques and how we mitigate that. So we are using different foreign entities and different companies to do the work. That means we also have to have cleared workers that kind of understand what's the work that's being performed, but actually directly oversee that work in addition to it. So,
Thank you. One final question from Master Sergeant Smith in the 422nd CES.
Well, it wasn't a question. It was more of a comment during the discussion regarding the specialized team that's located on Security Hill at San Antonio. You all are correct. They are a specialized team. Everyone is cleared, TS cleared, and they do have their leadership core who reaches out to potential customers, and they will send their personnel to assess and survey whatever the job, the scope of work that you all want done. And like you said, they pretty much would do it all for you as long as you have the time, the funding available based on their schedule. But yes, it's electricians, HVAC, plumbers, they got the entire logistics team, because if you're doing certain things, all of your equipment has to be stored in a classified area, shipped in a classified container with all the seals and everything, as you all were stating. So just kind of wanted to help you all understand that what you were saying with putting this gift together, they do have that particular team, but like you said, I'm not sure of any contractors that are qualified in that area.
Quite literally the A team. If you can find them and if you have enough money, you can hire them.
I will just
Exactly.
add on to that, and it's also mentioned in the 705. Sometimes companies are good for advertising that they do specialized work, which is, we find out, is not always the case. So, I guess pick your poison. Sometimes it's just as good to get somebody who's never done secure work, because they're very adamant about learning the process and exactly what they need to do, versus someone who's advertised that they've done it for many years, that ends up not knowing the process. So just something to keep in mind.
I'm sorry, just one more from Carl Sayer. With regards to test and inspection by cleared American guards, how would the USAFE prefer to calculate allowances for costs associated for the damage of materials? Would this be a % allowance made on all materials, or would this be better calculated on a case-by-case basis?
How would you answer that? And is he talking about damage during construction or damage during the process of construction? Because, well, during inspection.
I'm guessing during when they are stored at the SSA were checked by.
I don't know. I haven't heard an awful lot of that.
It's usually a percentage.
Yeah.
It usually comes down to a small percentage, especially when you're talking like gypsum drywall or something like that. A small percentage will be written into the CSP that this is the inspection process.
Inspected to destruction, as I would call it.
It is. So they always order extras just to meet that threshold that, we're going to have to look at one of every 100 units to inspect it for any type of tampering bugs or any type of impurities to meet that threshold of inspection.
But it's going to be single point percentages of anything.
And that's where you throw into randomization of where it is. So if you're making material for an entire site, this is where Steve was kind of talking about, you don't sit there and identify it. This is for your secure space. Here you go. And everybody knows that's for your secure space. What you do is you open that threshold and saying, this is for any facility at RAF Lakentheath, regardless of what kind of build it is. And then that site security guys are going to go out there and they're going to do a hand selection of the material they want, pull that out of that piece, and then they have a randomized piece that they can inspect. And then out of that randomized piece, they have a certain percentage that they might have to damage material to properly inspect that.
It's inside the box, exactly what the box says.
That's it. And you can't advertise that it's going in the box.
All right. So that officially ends the meeting. If anybody wanted to stay on, please feel free to take off everybody else, but we'll remain as long as the SMEs are willing to take any further questions, and we'll keep the teams running as well. Yeah, please go ahead.
Question. if a facility is to be designed in the UK using UK companies, how are the CTTA requirements transmitted? Because a lot of the mitigations that are required are based on US classified information. So how is that US classified requirement translated into the UK design?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're not disseminating classified information. So normally what is classified with the Tempest aspect of it is what they are categorizing that facility, like the sensitivity, the location, and the threat. That is what they're, but as far as like actually stating, obviously, if we're going to say that we require dielectric brakes on the HVAC, that's obviously something that we will disseminate to the contractor. We're not going to give them the direct Tempest guidance from the accrediting official. We'll identify, take from the tech specs, like, hey, dielectric brakes are required on the HVAC. Based on the tech specs, this is how we can go about doing it.
Things like the on the US side, someone's going to be looking at decibel loss across the perimeter. They're going to be looking at the frequencies through the textbook both sides. In the UK, someone's going to be choosing a type of foil, a type of honeycomb, but they won't have the requirements that are needed to select which foil.
And with Tempest, because it is so technical, a lot of times what we would do is, because they might just say, hey, we want a filter. We want a power filter required. And that's all that we get. And so we'll come back and be like, hey, we need a power filter. Can the contractor provide us how they think based on what they're installing, their already scope of work for the power, what would they recommend for the filter to look like? Can you give us the specs? And we will send that back up to the accrediting official and be like, hey, this is the filter we want to install. Does this meet the intent? They say yes or no, and then we press forward.
Okay. So it's the UK contractor, basically the UK designer gives the best guess. It gets a yes or no. But if it's
it's again why this thing has to be a designed solution from the get-go. It's so obviously this, because the further up that design tree you get, the closer you get to the people issuing the information. So you can get a dialogue, that goes ahead. That as my colleague across the table says, that you don't have to know the why, you just have to know the what.
Exactly.
And it's the what that may be able to be expressed without divulging the why.
And obviously, there's going to be flexibility as well. It's not like you must use this company. The door must be this exact model and make. That's the only option. We're just going to say it must meet this acoustical rating. It must have this type of lock. Even RF shielding. There's a variety of different applications you can buy for RF shielding. You can buy drywall that's already has RF shielding application. There's not. It's built with some flexibility, like it's very has the tech specs has all technical specifications, but it leaves room for do
creativity.
Our shielding, but tell us what you want to use and how you're gonna apply it. And those are all the things that we lay out in our accreditation document.
And the bottom line is that you need to account for that extra time for the back and forth of not knowing exactly what's necessary. But if you submit a proposal and it does come back as actually that doesn't meet the requirement, then you have to account for that extra time.
Sum it up by saying it's an iterative process.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yep. Please go ahead.
So I've seen some of these sort of prefabricated skiffs that you can get, and I thought for particularly projects Oconus, and particularly ones where the skiff is a smaller part of a larger building, it could be quite appealing to bring them in and then sort of have the rest of the building, whatever it might be, all the non-secure areas, and clad around it, so you have a normal looking building from the outside.
Box in a box.
Yeah, and you just have however many 5-10 containers of interlinked providing the skiff. Is that something you're aware that's been done or would or wouldn't be advisable?
It's not something that I've heard of or seen for like a large new construction project. So normally what they will do is like we talked about T-skiffs, so more like temporary, like deployable type of applications where we're just looking at like one room with X amount of computers, something that's easy to put on a plane and send it as needed. And sometimes they're more structurally sound, but they're still normally like a smaller scale, not normally something that where they were prefabricated like multiple pieces of the skiff.
Skip and a tent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking if you, though they sort of feel more temporary, if you put it in, sort of inside, had the roof over it, the wall cladding outside it, you could, maybe last as long as the rest of the facility.
I think when
It's-
you, sorry, go ahead.
It gets expensive too if you're talking about a larger construction because even something that's prefabricated, we're still talking about something that is US prefabricated. So it's not something that we can task a UK company to build in their warehouse with no oversight. And then it would end up being securely shipped. So having like a large building with multiple pieces of prefabrication would probably end up being pretty expensive.
Yeah, so really from our standpoint, there's two reasons to have a facility like that. Either one, you're trying to stand up a temporary facility that might be not quite as effective as a brick and mortar type build, but it's something that I have an immediate need. It has a shelf life, and I'm going to be able to put mitigating factors in there to meet that structural integrity that I need to do. Or there's the other part of it where you have a rigid facility that is deployable, or something that you can take from one location to another location because you need to be able to be mobile with that unit. I think the one thing you always have to remember with any type of temporary facility is there's a shelf life for all of that. You're not going to have the same acoustic and HVAC capabilities and structures within those facilities. So really those structures aren't meant for 24-hour type operations, or they're not meant for foreign nationals walking right next to it because the walls aren't built for that. They're built for, standoff distances and stuff. So I think it's fit for purpose. It's kind of like, what are you trying to get out of the facility? And then what kind of infrastructure are you going to try in there? Are you willing to put PDS, which is a protective distribution system, where you're actually putting an alarm system onto all the conduit that's going from one facility to another facility, because it goes through an area that's not actually within your secure facility. So there's a lot of infrastructural things you have to take into account when you're talking about any type of temporary or modular type facility that is advertised as a temp or temporary type facility that's to that SCIF standard. Because I can almost assure you, you're not going to find a facility that's out there that you're going to be able to plop down into any type of real estate space that right out of the box meets the ICD 705 tech specs. There's going to be limitations to that.
Sorry, Tom, there's no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts.
There is a purpose for them.
Well, you bring up some good points though, right? So what we're trying to accomplish here at Croughton in the interim, if we're given the green light that we actually warrant a SCIF and need a SCIF for operations, right? Our initial response was going to be, hey, we'll acquire one of these SCIF in a box idea. The rumor mill goes that someone was able to do it in Ramstein. I don't have the full details on that, but in the interim, it would be the SCIF in a box concept. And then a few years from now, I'd say less than 10 years or less, we'd have our Milcom project. And then our plan is to have a box built. We'll relocate that SCIF in a box next to the Milcom and then build the box around that. So it's in a hardened structure.
I think that there's still a good amount of utility and work to even make that outer shell compliant so that SCIF in a box still maintains its rating.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, we've definitely got a long ways to go figuring that out, but right now it's not terribly hot because no one's really validated our need for a SCIF yet. But no, appreciate the input on the information.
Hello, my name is Mike McCarley. I'm with a contractor. And there is a company in the UK called Workspace Technology, and they build mobile SCIFs, temporary SCIFs, and modular skiffs, and they have deployed those into Europe, specifically in Germany for the Air Force. And I could send their information to you if you're interested.
We've got one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you don't mind, just send the information. That'd be great.
At 1345.
Yeah, that'd be.
They had all kinds of issues with it. But I mean, I have a bad history with any of those modular. We have quite a few of them. We deploy with some of them.
Oh, yes.
So there's a lot of wear and
Sim
tear on
behind,
those, right?
sim behind
So
those
like you got Elmers and DDS and stuff like that that go out and they're supposed to be mobile units. But then we have that unit that sits out behind 1345. There's been constant issues, leaking and stuff. They told us when we purchased that facility, there was a 5-year shelf life on it. It's got a flat ceiling and we're in England where it rains and guess what happens there, right? So that'll all be my stance. You know, if you're trying to build a facility, a brick and mortar type real estate facility in 5 years and you need to have that capability today, then yeah, I think you can bridge that gap. But when you get past that 5 to 10 years, you start running into issues and then you kind of start wondering, now I have a critical failure on that system. How do I get to that system if I've built around it to correct those downfalls and discrepancies?
The other thing sometimes with these types of facilities that I've seen we run into is maintenance. So sometimes because they're not permanent base structures, I don't know if it's a difference here in England, but they're not considered real property.
If they're equipment, they don't get maintained.
Right. And more normally a deployable type of shelter that is a mission, like a user owner procurement, is not a base asset. And that gets overlooked. And then there is no maintenance contracts because it's not base property. And it's a whole nother thing that goes with it.
My hush houses are equipment. Looks much like a building, but it's equipment.
Well, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your afternoon.